Okay, so this topic might seem like it's a bit late, though I will remind you that the old calendar Christmas, which is still celebrated in some Eastern churches, is actually tomorrow. So I feel like it's not too late to do a video on Christmas and its origins. In particular, today I'll be discussing, as you can see, the question of whether or not Christmas is secretly some sort of pagan holiday. This is an accusation that I'm sure everyone in my audience has heard at one point or another, at least those of you who are Westerners. It's a very common one. It's one I remember hearing growing up. And I even remember being the supposedly smart little kid pointing out to people, haha, don't you know Christ wasn't really born on Christmas? Now, granted, I didn't do that for some sort of atheistic or anti-Christian reason. I just did that to point out how big-brained and smart I was. Now, it is certainly a bit cringe to look back on myself as a child and see how annoying I must have been on this topic. Though it's certainly quite a bit more cringe to look at the adults today who not only continue to push this narrative, but continue to believe that they're discovering some sort of secret hidden information, when I hardly know a person that hasn't heard this narrative at one point or another. But there are two questions to be considered here. The first is, was Christ actually born on December 25th? And the second is Christmas pagan, whether or not that first claim is true? Now, if Christ was actually born on December 25th, then it would make the paganism claims quite a bit less likely. But you could still, I suppose, conceive that even if the dates did line up, it's still possible for Christmas to be some sort of secret pagan holiday. So, what you would probably expect me to do here, at this point in the video, is go over the evidence for the birth of Christ on December 25th. But that's not actually what I want to do. What I'm much more interested in here is discussing this concept of secret paganism. I have heard plenty of people go over the supposed evidence for the birth of Christ on the 25th. One such example involves the dates of the conception and birth of John the Baptist, and showing that if you look at everything right, you'll see that it actually lines up just perfectly, showing that Christ was born either on or around December 25th. Now, is that true? Is the evidence actually compelling there? I don't know. I could hardly care less, honestly. Even for making this video, I didn't spend the bit of time to go through that data and figure out if it's really compelling or not. Because, as I said, I think it's all a bit beside the point. The real issue here is I'm not even really sure what it means for something to be accidentally or secretly pagan. This narrative is pushed, I think, primarily by two main groups. Now, clearly, as I've already shown, I, as a relatively normal evangelical Christian child, pushed this very narrative, and I don't think evangelical Christians are one of the two main groups pushing this narrative. So clearly this narrative is something that has just sort of been sopped up by the broader culture and pushed by many different people. But the two main groups that are really making an effort to push this, I think, is the atheist crowd and certain pseudo-Christian groups. The motivation of both of these groups in pushing this narrative should be pretty clear. The reason why atheists want to push the idea that Christians for all these years have actually been wrong about when the birth of their own savior happened is because they think it helps delegitimize the whole culture. It's a way to insult Christians by saying the most popular celebration of their religion is actually based on a lie. Of course, they believe the entire religion is a lie, but in addition to that, they think this is one little way to show that even your celebrations are in themselves lies. You think for all these years you were worshipping Christ? Well, actually, you were worshipping some sort of Roman pagan god. Actually, you were celebrating Saturnalia, not Christmas. The motivation of certain pseudo-Christian groups in pushing this same narrative is quite similar. Now, referring to all these groups as pseudo-Christian may be unfair. I'm mainly using that term because the main group that I'm referring to are the Jehovah's Witnesses, who certainly are not any type of Christian. But there are other groups, such as hardline evangelicals and some other groups of actual Christians, who believe in this same narrative. And in particular here, I'm not just referring to the idea that Christmas was not really on December 25th, but also the belief that the Jehovah's Witnesses and some other similar groups hold, that these Christians are actually celebrating secretly some sort of pagan holiday. Their motivation, just as the atheist motivation, is to demonstrate how far subverted mainstream Christianity has been, that even their main holidays are actually just some sort of thinly veiled pagan celebration. That the whole thing, if you just look at it a little bit more carefully, is really just paganism. And also, of course, the Jehovah's Witnesses would be quite eager to point out the fact that Christmas certainly is not explicitly celebrated anywhere in the Bible. For that matter, it's hardly implicitly celebrated anywhere in the Bible. Now, of course, the birth of Christ is quite clearly established there, but no date is assigned with it. And there is certainly no instruction in the Bible anywhere that instructs believers to celebrate the birth of Christ in any particular way or at any particular time. There's also, of course, hardly any prohibition against doing any of that. And the fact that the early Christians celebrated the birth of Christ is quite easy to historically attest to, even if the date can be debated. But all of that's a bit besides the point. Whether it's the atheist contention, or the Jehovah's Witnesses contention, or the contention of one similar group, the main point that I want to talk about here is what does it even mean for a holiday to be secretly pagan? Now, one thing that you could mean by this is, since it's not celebrated on the correct day, you're not really correctly celebrating Christ's birth. But I'm not even really sure where someone would get that contention from. If, say, for example, you were born, and there was never any proper record kept of the date of your birth, but you still had birthday celebrations every year for your entire life, with the assumption that your parents remembered the right date, but eventually, when you became old, you found out that the date that they said that you were born on was off, maybe by a month, maybe a few days, maybe a few months, who knows, who cares? Would that really matter? Would you really care that much? I'm not really sure why that would matter at all, to be honest. Is the intention of celebrating your birthday not to celebrate you? Isn't the point of a birthday supposed to be so your friends and family can show you that they care about you? And does that really change anything if it's a few days or a few months off? Would you really feel like after 80 years of birthdays, there was something mystically wrong with your birthdays because they weren't on the right date? I know that the Jehovah's Witnesses in particular, in addition to their prohibition of celebrating Christmas, also have a prohibition of celebrating all birthdays. They claim that that very practice is in itself pagan. But honestly, I think this is the actual pagan mentality. The idea that there's something mystical about your date of birth, and if it's off by a few days, then somehow, mystically, the celebration rendered to you, or to your Lord, is no longer fitting. That's no longer good because you didn't nail down the right date. Returning to the previous example, if you found out that not only the birthday that you celebrated all your birthdays on for your entire life was actually the birth date of, say, someone else from your town, would you feel like you were actually celebrating their birthday? If the cake, the presents, the dinner was all for you, and all done in your celebration? Would you seriously try and say that that means the birthday was actually secretly being done for the kid across the street? Again, my point is, this contention of secret paganism just seems really weird to me. Even if Christmas was being celebrated on the same date as some pagan holiday, I don't see how that makes Christmas itself pagan. We know at the very least the date being fixed at December 25th for the celebration of Christmas goes back to at least the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, and quite possibly further back before that. But that means for at least about 1700 years, Christians all throughout the world have been celebrating the birth of Christ on that date, December 25th. Why would it be supposed that Christians gathering publicly or privately to worship the Christ, clearly and publicly proclaiming that that is what they are doing, would in some secret mystical way actually be secretly worshipping some sort of pagan god? Is not the thing that mainly matters the intention that this is what our culture and our religion is being centered around? Compared to that, is the date not, for the most part, superfluous? Okay, now, I understand. Some people would say I'm strawmanning here. It's not just purely about the date of Christmas being wrong, and the possibility that the date was picked to coincide with some ancient pagan holiday. That alone is not what makes it a secret pagan holiday. The similarity is the Christmas tree, or some other Christmas ritual that we retain to this day. Though, of course, the Christmas tree is a modern invention, so how that could have some sort of continuity with an ancient pagan practice is a bit beyond me. But still, that's besides the point. I understand that someone who would actually vigorously defend the view of secret paganism would say it's more complicated, probably, than just a single day. And certainly, the very real practice of syncretism is something that exists to this day and is practiced by some supposed Christians throughout the world. There are, in some places, Christians who continue to practice things like voodoo, or in much of Latin America, worship of the so-called Saint Death is still quite popular. But the reason why practices like those are actually syncretic is because you're actually trying to practice voodoo. You're actually trying to invoke some type of magic, or you're actually worshipping some sort of pagan spirit. I still just totally fail to understand how gathering on the wrong day, or gathering around a tree, real or fake, could in itself be some sort of pagan practice, even if those practices were inspired by some sort of traditionally pagan practice. I don't see how these objects or these dates could possibly be in themselves pagan. And that is, I think, the fundamental problem. And this is the reason I made this video. It's not just because of Christmas in itself, but it's this concept of secret paganism that is often alleged against Christianity, and especially Catholicism in particular. As I said, I certainly do understand what syncretism is. It's an actual practice that some people do, and it actually is blasphemous. But I'm not even really sure what it means to allege secret syncretism or secret paganism. One example of this is I remember someone once mentioning the model used for one particularly famous depiction of Jesus was some sort of person that committed some sort of sins. I don't really know. I don't really care. But he alleged this means that Christians are actually secretly worshipping this dude and not Jesus. And again, just as with Christmas, this seems to be a nonsensical statement to me. To say that someone can both internally and externally be worshipping what seems to be Jesus, but because of some sort of secret thing, because a painting is based on some man who has a model, that means that actually all the worship is going to that dude. This seems just like a totally nonsensical statement. And that is the problem with the hypothesis of secret paganism. Thanks for watching. Please donate to my Subscribestar or Patreon if you enjoy this content. And please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and share these videos with anyone who you think will enjoy them. And a special thanks to my donors, yourself, Siphius Rex, Litta, Quo Preganator, Haxorius, Adzutko, Josiah, King of Evil Florida and the Moon, Seth Apex, Richard, Cringewalker, Zian Harris, Thomas Thomist, Windowlick, Augustine, and Skytoucher. Thanks again everyone for watching, and goodbye.